Hello everybody and welcome back. We are examining the frontier in Assassin's Creed 3, Weatherman style. This is new for us, so getting into it. Today we're zooming in on Lexington, Massachusetts, which is a location obviously that exists in real life and exists in the frontier, and it is this region right here of the map. So we're gonna zoom in on Lexington. Here it is. So this is the beautiful city, or I guess town, more of a village really, Lexington in Assassin's Creed 3. And there are 5 areas that I kind of want to talk about that can kind of cement the 1770s with modern day Lexington. And that's the Munroe Tavern, which is way out in the east. We have the Belfry, which is near the town center. Buckman Tavern, again in that area. The Hancock-Clarke House, which is right here. And then the cemetery. Now, when we're looking at these areas, Monroe Tavern is a place you can visit today. In our actual world, that is home to part of the Lexington Historical Society. There's a museum there as well. The Belfry was actually moved to right about there in our times, but it does exist and it is still there. Buckman Tavern is exactly where it has been for a while. The Hancock-Clarke House has moved, but has come back to its original location. A long story there. And then the cemetery isn't really, it's not a marked location in Assassin's Creed 3, but it's the only cemetery in Lexington, and so I'm kind of guesstimating that this is the Yel Burial Ground, which you can visit in modern day Lexington. I wanted to get at least 5 areas where we can point to and say, this is a place that looked like this in Assassin's Creed 3 in the 1700s, and this is what it looks like today. So, with that being said, the first place I want to kind of examine is one that I was able to visit, and that is, of course, Buckman Tavern. Very old and historic tavern, obviously in the city of Lexington, and this is historically significant for a lot of reasons, but mainly on its role in the Battle of Lexington. But for now, I just want to touch on, so this is what Buckman Tavern looks like today. And let's see, what does it look like in Assassin's Creed 3? Here we are. So a pretty good match. There are some minor differences, but in general, when you're looking at that tavern and you compare it to what it looks like in 2024, it's pretty close. So the historic tavern today is actually, I would say, done pretty good justice by Ubisoft. And this is an area in the game. You have to visit it for side quests. In particular, I believe that the Frontiersman side quests bring you to every tavern in the game, so this is one of them. But it doesn't play a role in the Battle of Lexington and Concord like it should in real life, like it should in the game to kind of copy real life. But it is a place you can visit, very historic, very cool, that you can see it today. I'm not going to show you any of the interior because I don't want to spoil it. I would rather the museum actually get people in. So for now, we're just going to stick to the exteriors. And yes, this is what Buckman Tavern looks like in Assassin's Creed 3. And let's move on to something that isn't marked, but it's something I want to touch on. So this is the Battle Green of Lexington. Buckman Tavern is, this is going to be really tricky, going to test my weatherman skills. Right across this street, Buckman Tavern's right over there. So this is the Battle Green. This is where colonial militia met and fought and died to start the American Revolution. Obviously, we're going to touch on that a lot more when we get into the video specifically, but this area, when we go into the game, I just want to keep it in mind, tell you to keep this in mind, that this is what it looks like today. We'll move on to our next location, the Hancock-Clarke House. So this is the location where Paul Revere meets up with John Hancock and Samuel Adams on the kind of night right before the Battle of Lexington and Concord, giving them the warning that there are regulars there to arrest them. Moving on from that, we can go to the cemetery, Yel Burying Ground in Lexington. This is a little bit hidden off the beaten path when it comes to some of these locations in comparison. It's near the town Battle Green, but it is a little bit ways back. As we'll show in the game, it's going to look a little bit different. That's largely just because I'm guessing that the only cemetery kind of modeled in Assassin's Creed 3 would be this one. And this is the Monroe Tavern, as you can see. It's run by the Lexington Historical Society, which I'll touch on when we jump into the game here. I don't have like a comparison image here, but just keep in mind, nice dark red. It's got 5 on the top, 4 on the bottom, but it's built similarly to a lot of other structures from around this time, where it's wide, it's got the slanted roofs, and yeah, obviously an important tavern at the time. We'll touch on the history when we jump into the game. Then I can take you to the old Belfry. So this is the old Belfry in Lexington, as it is in 2024. As you can see, it's up on a hilltop a little bit. It's a ways from where it was originally. Once again, I'll touch on that in the actual, when we jump into the game, I'll touch on the history there. But this is what it looks like today, and it's near the Lexington Public Library, right near the Lexington Battle Green as well. So if you're looking to explore, do a little Battle of Lexington Day for yourself while I push a cat away from biting something underneath. If you're looking to spend the day in Lexington, the Belfry, Munroe Tavern, Buckman Tavern, Hancock-Clarke House, and the Olde Burial Ground, they're all actually within walking distance. Yeah, you can kind of do this tour of Lexington pretty easily. I'll bring the map back up here. Yeah, so as you can see in the game itself, it doesn't take too far to get. It doesn't take too long to go from Monroe to Buckman to the Belfry to the cemetery in Hancock, and that's pretty much true today. Ubisoft did a pretty good job when we talk about examining what Lexington looked like back then and comparing it to how it's evolved to today. I think I can leave you with that before jumping into Assassin's Creed 3 and walking you to these structures and telling you a little bit about the history. And to reiterate, this is Buckman Tavern, the more famous of the two taverns available to visit in the game, also available to visit in 2024. It exists to this day. We've kind of compared and contrasted what it looks like nowadays to then, but I just want to kind of recap on some of the historical facts when we're talking about this place. So when we touch on Buckman Tavern, it was built around 1709, 1710 by one Benjamin Muzzy, and it was the first public house in Lexington. By the time of the battle, it was being operated by Muzzy's great-granddaughter and her husband, John Buckman. Yep, Buckman Tavern. Very creative. Militiamen frequented this place as it was located next to their training ground, what would become the Lexington Battle Green. And on the morning of the 19th, the morning of the battle, militiamen kind of gathered inside this building, and the story goes that when they heard that the British troops were marching in, they basically, I'll adjust the camera to kind of show, they basically came out of this tavern, assembled on the Battle Green, which would be in this general area. I think the game is implying that this would be it, but I think geographically it makes a little bit more sense if it was over here. Either way, neither here nor there. They march out of here, basically form into parade stance and confront the British forces without confronting them. They stand their ground. British forces approach and say, hey, we'd like you to disarm. Obviously the soldiers, the militiamen would prefer not to do that. A shot rings out, shots being exchanged between the two groups. Largely though, the colonials kind of retreat up into Concord, scatter generally, and the British forces basically march along that main road, which would be actually the southern road down that way, because that would be north. They march along that way to progress to Concord, which is here, and to the Old North Bridge, and past it, then back. So, yeah, as I was saying, I think this is what the game thinks the parade ground would be, that the Lexington battle green, but that's Buckman Tavern. A little bit more about the history. I'm going to get into the Battle of Lexington when we talk about it in a specific video. For now, we'll cover that, let that be covered, and move on to the next location. As you can see, we're casually looking at our next place, the Hancock-Clarke House. We've touched on it a little bit before, but we're looking at it now live in game. This is a structure that has relatively interesting history. It was built in 1738 by Reverend John Hancock, the grandfather of the more famous John Hancock, and it was taken over by the Reverend Jonas Clark, hence Hancock-Clarke House, in 1752. So it was more of a home for the Reverend rather than the original Hancock's just personal house. So on the evening of April 18th, the British regulars have a couple of tasks that they're trying to accomplish here. The main one being getting to Concord to remove any military stores that they find there, but they would also like to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock for stirring things up, basically. And this is where they are. So this is where Paul Revere rides to, along with the other riders. We see that in the mission, the very frustrating mission in Assassin's Creed 3. This is the exact house that we walk up to, so I did confirm, even though it's different color and some of the design is a little off, this is the house that Assassin's Creed 3 is convinced is the Hancock-Clarke House. So we'll take their word for it and just say that the colors are off for some reason. It yellowed with time, perhaps. Interestingly, the men, John Hancock, Sam Adams, they escape north and spend the night at a place called Amos Wyman's homestead. That house is not standing anymore, but I did go to where the foundation was. There's a plaque there that you can visit, and it's just the shortest of hikes to get to it. So I'll put that picture in this video as well, just to kind of give you a little bit more of the real history, the 2024 history of their adventure. So we can move on to the next one though. And here is the unmarked location. This is just a guess for me again, but I wanted to make sure that we got this in. Yel Burying Ground in Lexington. We are in Lexington. This is the only burying ground I could find, and this is the 1700s. So that all lines up to make sense that this would be it. We got a nice spooky atmosphere inadvertently. The weather is random, so that's just, I guess, a happy coincidence. And so this is what the gravestones kind of look like. There's some interesting history when it comes to this place. In particular, it is tied to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, so I'll go through that. This is the oldest cemetery in Lexington. Earliest graves date back to the late 1600s, which is obviously very interesting. Some of the most prominent settlers of Lexington are buried here, but when we talk about the Battle of Lexington, this is where those 8 soldiers for the colonial militia were originally buried. Their bodies were interred in a grave here until the 1830s, when they were dug up, brought to the battle green where they originally died, and buried there instead, with a plaque kind of commemorating them. Odd thing in my opinion to do, but move them roughly a quarter of a mile after they'd been long at rest. But hey, anyway, the one British soldier who did die as a result of his wounds in the battle is buried in this cemetery. Not in the game, because that battle either hasn't happened and they didn't want to have to kind of change the landscape, or it has happened and they just didn't care to add it in. But he's buried here, not named, unfortunately, but his gravestone is in the 2024 Yel Burying Ground in Lexington, and you can find it. There are 2 British flags there. I'll add a picture of that in this one to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. But yeah, he's buried in this one. Anyway, so that's it for that one. We can look at the Monroe Tavern and touch on some of the history, why it's relevant today, why we're talking about it at all. So the earliest part of this tavern was built in 1735, and it was a residence, was converted into a tavern, got its taverner's license in October of 1774, a handful of months before the Battle of Lexington. On April 18th, a colonial revolutionary kind of came here to warn the owner, one William Monroe, that British forces were likely coming up through Lexington and into Concord. William Monroe is notable because he was the sergeant of Captain John Parker. Captain John Parker led the Lexington militia at the battle. So that's the connection why he would be one to warn there. The day of the battle, Colonel Hugh Percy used this building as his headquarters. He was obviously a British soldier, and his 1,000 reinforcements that kind of gathered in Lexington after that battle, they used this as a field hospital. In fact, the dining room was where the wounded would be brought in to kind of care for. Now, you can visit this structure today. It exists in Lexington. I'll have a picture to kind of compare what it looks like. It's a darker red than this almost pink that we can see here. It is basically maintained by the Lexington Historical Society in order to display the battle from the British perspective, give a little insight on what was going on in their mind, their motivations, and then how they kind of dealt with wounded and the fact that conflict had broken out. So I will not show anything from the interior. Once again, I don't like to spoil museums. I like people to go, so don't want to give away everything, but it's a great take, and we can move on to our next location. Okay, moving on to the Old Belfry. This, once again, exists in Assassin's Creed 3 and modern day. It has survived, though it has been reconstructed, and obviously there's been damage, wear and tear. It's an old structure. But we're talking about, yes, this basically a bell structure. Belfry is what it's called, in Lexington. I'll just walk you through some of the basic facts here. It was constructed in 1762. They basically made it in this area to toll, to warn people that it was time to go to church, it was time to sleep. There was danger coming, and then to mark when someone had passed away, they would toll it for that as well. It rings to this day on Patriots Day, which is like a day, local holiday basically, to remark on the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And it has moved a couple of times. It was moved to a local, like it was technically private property, and so that man wanted to charge the town, so they ended up moving it back. But long story short, it's not where it is on this in this game today. It is, instead of it being here, it's further south on a hill. So it's not in the main part of town. It's not on the battle green or anything like that, but it is nearby, so that lines up. And I mentioned that obviously it's been through some stuff. In 1909 it was destroyed by a storm, but it was rebuilt the year after. So that's the Old Belfry. And that will do it for us today. This is a lot of, we're pushing our bounds here at the channel, Broadside wise. There's a lot to kind of come together, so I appreciate your patience with my relatively feeble setup here. But yeah, I appreciate your patience. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you liked the video. Subscribe for more. There will be more. It just might take me a little while. But we can consider Lexington crossed off. I'd really like to talk about Concord because it's pretty close, and I can pretty much cover that, quite easily. But I'd like to talk about the Mohawk Valley, Johnstown, Valley Forge, all these interesting places, except for Diamond Basin, which is lame. All these in good time. Might not be able to go to physically take pictures of certain places because they're very far from me, but in the meantime, when I can, I will. So thank you again for watching. I appreciate it so much, and I hope you have a good day.